So do you want me to just share a screen and say say who I am and then share a screen? Is that still
Yes, we
reasonable?
want to, absolutely. So for
Okay.
this session of class today, we are going to welcome Ms. Hull, who's going to speak to all of us about the imposter syndrome. And so we will pass it over to her to introduce herself and to further explain all the good things that she has for us today.
Ooh, ooh. I like good. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Hull. I am an academic and pre-health advisor at the University of Michigan in the Comprehensive Studies program. And today I'm going to share with you all a presentation that actually was initially developed for McNair scholars when Dr. Carmen McCallum Motley was helming the program, and Dr. Kimberly Brown, who's now helming the program, so the program is in very good hands, was also working with the program, and they invited me to bring this. And it has been in a lot of ways, and I'm going to thank you right now, Dr. Brown, just as I thanked Carmen a little earlier today when I saw her, for this, because I've had these conversations a lot with students, and then I have a friend who has a program, and I've taken it to her program and presented it. And we don't realize how much we have in common, this need to stay aware of the lens through which we're proceeding into these places, especially when they are places that we are pioneering for ourselves and people in our community. And so I'm hoping that this will facilitate a sense of staying aware. I know it does for me. Every time I present it, I learn something from it, and I'm grateful for that. So I will share my screen and pray that my screen sharing is all that it needs to be. And and we're gonna rock and roll through this. I think this is I want to say, I think it's a fun presentation. I hope that that's how it is perceived by you all. Um, and so I'm just going to go ahead and talk about imposter syndrome. So naming this, when I was looking for a name, and I always confess this to people, I'm so terrible at titles. It's a good thing I didn't have to name children because it could have gotten ugly. But um, but I really like this title for this topic, who and what do you believe? Because really, with imposter syndrome and its impact on your progress through your education, career, and life, um, it does kind of come down to who and what you believe. And so we're going to move on, and we're going to start with the basics. What is imposter syndrome? And it's always funny because I think whenever I present this in person, I watch the body language, and people will have that, like, yeah, I know what this is. I know what this is. And then as I go through the definition and then the types of imposter syndrome, all of a sudden the body language changes, and like, oh my God, wait a minute, I'm in there. So if you see yourself in there, it's nothing to be nervous about. It's actually a good thing. The more we can identify, the better we are at identifying the things that we live with, the better we are at managing the life that we want to live. So, what is imposter syndrome? So here's a definition. Imposter syndrome is the internal psychological experience of feeling like a phony in some area of your life. And it could be areas of your life, despite any success that you have achieved in that area. And I think the real important crux of this is, despite any success that you have achieved in that area, oftentimes we have, and then I'll give you the other definition, we have evidence to the contrary, of worrying about whether or not we're where we're supposed to be, and we don't pay attention to it. So, imposter syndrome can be defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persists despite evident success. Imposters suffer from chronic self doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that may override any feelings of success or external proof of their competence. And that's, again, important things to keep in mind. So I always try to show this YouTube video. It never works for me. I promised to send it. Maisha, should I send it to you?
Yes.
Okay, I'll send this to you. It's a really good, but what I will say to set it up so you'll know what it's about is it's a really cool TEDx video about imposter syndrome that features um, Maya Angelou and Albert Einstein. These are people we all agree, were very successful, had very successful lives, accomplished much, and yet they suffered from imposter syndrome. So it's not just us, there are a lot of people who suffer from imposter syndrome. So there are five basic types of imposter syndrome. And I'm going to go through them. And since I'm presenting, I'll just go ahead and read them. And then you all will discuss when you get where you're going. But there's the perfectionist. This type of imposter syndrome involves believing that unless you were absolutely perfect, you could have done better. You feel like an imposter because your perfectionist traits make you believe that you're not as good as others might think you are. And that's the interesting thing too. You think you're not doing as well. Oftentimes, we'll get information from other people, and actually from people that we trust, that says that we're doing well and we're not always sort of taking it to heart. And then there's the expert. The expert feels like an imposter because they don't know everything there is to know about a particular subject or topic, or they haven't mastered every step in the process. So because there is more for them to learn, they don't feel as if they've reached the rank of expert. And that's one that always kind of fascinates me. I always want to refer people back to Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers, where he talks about 10,000 hours, that when you reach 10,000 hours of work in a particular area, you've reached a level of expertise. And oftentimes people will, go, oh, 10,000. Well, that doesn't mean that you've learned everything you could learn. Again, I was saying this to the last set of people I was having this conversation with. I was listening to Terry Gross on Fresh Air talking to Yo-Yo Ma, who I think now is in his 70s. And Yo-Yo Ma has been playing since he was, I think he either said 2 or 4. He's been playing the cello. And if you know who Yo-Yo Ma is as an expert cellist that everybody loves and wants to spend time with, you know that this is somebody that is deemed like top level in that area. And yet he talked about, I think it's the Bach concertos that he has recorded. He said something like 4 or 5 different times in his life, same set of music, but he talks about the fact that there are things that you learn, there are things going on that help you to interpret in a different way. Here's somebody who recognizes that he is still learning and growing and fine tuning his expertise in an area that he's already deemed expert. And then the next syndrome, the natural genius. In this imposter syndrome type, you may feel like a fraud simply because you don't believe that you are naturally intelligent or competent. If you don't get something right the first time around, or it takes you longer to master a skill, you feel like an imposter. And, it's funny. I always think about, I think it's William Zinsser. It was a book that I read on writing well. And William Zinsser, who talks about, here's somebody writing books about writing. And one of the things he always included in On Writing Well were galley pages from his editor. Here's somebody who writes about writing and is considered an expert, and still goes through editing. And when you look at those galley pages, there are lots of things that need to be tweaked. And so, yeah, he knows a lot. Doesn't get it right the first time. In fact, one of the principles in this book is there are very, very, very few first draft writers, that most of us go through multiple drafts to make sure that we clarify what it is we're trying to share. So, just something to think about. And then the soloist, it's also possible, excuse me, to feel like an imposter if you had to ask for help. to reach a certain level or status. Since you couldn't get there on your own, you question your competence or abilities. And I think about that phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Very few of us can do things as, as a soloist, right? Most of us are working in concert with people. And it's important to do so because it expands your knowledge base and it also helps you to see things you would not see. So it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength to bring other people into the mix. And then the super person. This type of imposter syndrome involves believing that you must be the hardest worker or reach the highest levels of achievement possible. And if you don't, you're a fraud. So these are just things to keep in mind. I did put the attribution of where this came from in the slide. You all will see it. Feel free to look it up if you think it would be helpful. So, what are some characteristics of imposter syndrome, you might ask, if you were here? So, I'm going to tell you. An inability to realistically assess your competence and skills. Again, not listening, not listening. They're in the background, and you're like, no, 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 can't hear you. Attributing your success to external factors. When you hear people sort of push out, somebody goes, oh my God, that was amazing. And they go, oh, that was the fact that other people, are being just kind. Sometimes it just was amazing. And we need to figure out how to bring that to heart. Berating your performance, oh, it was an A minus, it wasn't an A, or it was an A, it wasn't an A plus. Fear that you won't live up to expectations. And I think a lot of us have that fear. I think there are some healthy aspects to that fear, but when it gets to the point where it can be paralyzing or distressing, you might want to address it. Overachieving, trying to do too much, and believing too little in what you have accomplished. I think that says what it needed to say. Sabotaging your own success, self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think we do that a lot, whether we mean to or not. Self-doubt and setting very challenging goals and feeling disappointed when you fall short. And that's why intermediate and sometimes short-term goals, along with, bigger goals, are very important. So let's talk about this. In terms of, whose voices are you listening to? This goes back to the title, right? Is yours among the chorus? And what are you saying to yourself? Very important to keep in mind that the voice that you are going to hear early and often is the one that resides inside of you. And you need to be mindful of that. You need to be mindful of what that voice is saying to you. Do you need to change the communications that you are having with yourself? Again, this is one of the most important series of conversations that we have that can impact us in ways we're not always giving credence to. And do you need to rethink how you take in feedback from others? Again, just because it comes from somebody else doesn't make it gospel. It does not have to be the thing that you have to listen to or believe is true. So I often encourage people to flip the script a bit. While we will ask why you, I say, why not you? Or encourage people to think, why not you? Should I be here turns into thinking about why your presence is important in this time and place. You know, um, Asking yourself, where else do you really think you should be? And oftentimes now, and why? But oftentimes when you interrogate that, you realize you're where you want to be. You just need to figure out how to get comfortable there. Um, are you able to do this? Am I able to do this? Is there anything, and I often, want to encourage people to think, is there anything I cannot give a good college try to? How often have I tried and succeeded? Because we oftentimes think about the times when we tried and things didn't work. Who will help me? Am I on my own? And the question I'm usually asking, and I thank Mr. Rogers for this, is have I sought out assistance or cultivated networks that can get me the support and instrumental help and information I need to move forward? I think about Mr. Rogers because Mr. Rogers used to encourage and encouraged until he left us, um, look for the helpers. He said, always look for the helpers. If you look for the helpers, you will find them. And then the big one is, do I belong here? Right? Um, and again, you got in. You must belong here. This must be where you need to be. And now, the better question is now, how do I help? There should be an I in there. This place embrace my presence here. And sometimes you're going to need to do that. Okay, so context matters. I'm big on context. Context matters. You are here. This is a place you strive to be, that others who care about you encouraged you to be. You're still trying to figure out how you wound up here, and you want to make something of this. So, give yourself some time to figure it out. And then fill in the blank. If it is that you're still trying to figure out how you wound up here and what you want to make of it, which one of these is most attuned to you. But the most important thing is you are here. So how might you think about you here, right? Again, context matters. We often find ourselves in places that were not designed for people like us, and you fill in the blank on how that applies to you. Because it can be a whole spectrum of things. We oftentimes think small about gender, or race, or age, but there are so many other ways: socioeconomic status, ability status. Sometimes it's, first gen status, that kind of thing, where you don't have a family history or a community history in spaces like this and can't figure out, how do I proceed, right? But so it may not be designed for people like us. You might bring diversity to your lab, classroom, or discussion group. Your presence might challenge the assumptions that homogenous thinking is used to falling back on, which I think is a good thing because that's how you stretch and that's how we acquire knowledge. So in these contexts, there might be pushback from without, but there also might be pushback from within. If you're being uncomfortable, might cause you to believe that you should not be where you are. So I'm going to ask you to think about taking a different tack. And so I always ask, can I share a story as food for thought? And since there's nobody here, I'm going to say, thank you for asking. I will. So I'm gonna share a story or some thoughts from The Wizard of Oz from the perspective of Dorothy's journey on The Wizard of Oz. The lessons from Dorothy's journey are insightful. If you haven't seen The Wizard of Oz, go back and watch it. The Wiz is great, but go back and watch The Wizard of Oz, which is the natural outcome of The Wiz. For Dorothy, she focused on her goals while staying aware of where she was and wasn't. And so how might that help you? I'm glad you asked. Okay, so let's put her situation in context. In The Wizard of Oz, the tornado picks up the house in Kansas. Dorothy's in the house, and Dorothy ends up in Oz. The house gets picked up and it's carried someplace. She was no longer in a familiar place. She was out of a comfortable context. What were her options? Now, she could have sat down at the edge of the ruined house with her dog, Toto, and felt helpless, hopeless, helpless, and cried. She could have hoped that someone would come by and rescue her and solve her problems for her. And she could have decided she was trapped with no hope of getting back to where she came from. But this is what she did. Dorothy assessed her situation. She looked around the house. She was like, how did I get here? This is a little strange. She looked out beyond the house. She was like, this doesn't look like anything I'm familiar with. She located her dog. Toto was the man. It was good that he hung out with her all the way through because I'm telling you, he was like the best companion she could have had. He was her ride or die. So when she's standing there and the Munchkins who live in that area approach her because she's in Munchkin land, when the Munchkins approached her, she told them who she was, where she was from, and and asked where she currently was. So she got a sense of where am I? This is who I am. Where am I? So once she learned she was in Oz, she let them know that her goal was to return to Kansas. And she asked them for assistance to return there. Now, they didn't have a clue how to help her in terms of actually getting back to Kansas, but they suggested that if she made it to the Emerald City, the Wizard of Oz might be able to help. So they referred her. They said, I don't know, but I'm going to give you a referral that might be helpful. And again, if you ask for assistance, people sometimes can point you to things that you don't know about. And so then she asked for directions. Now, I always thought it was interesting they didn't give her like a crew to go along with her and help her get where she was going. That might have made it a little easier. But instead, she asked for directions. They pointed to the yellow brick road, told her to follow it, and sent her on her way. Now, Dorothy was in a place she didn't know, but she believed in her ability to follow a path. And with Toto by her side, she proceeded along that path. Why is her situation relevant to yours potentially? Your focus really needs to be on where you want to go. And you will need to acknowledge that the road ahead might not be familiar. You may be feeling out of your element, but also acknowledge that you have been and I think she recognized this, you have been savvy enough in the past to find the helpers. And I'm going to talk about that with the Wizard of Oz in a second. And with Dorothy, she found her helpers along the road, even though they didn't give her any to go with her. You have also been able to adapt and learn what you needed to progress to this point and succeed in new places. This is not your first time in a new place, right? And wherever you go next will not be your first time in a new place. There will be obstacles. But let me go back just for a second and go back to the finding the helpers. Dorothy gets set along her path, and on her way, she finds the Scarecrow, she finds the Tin Man, and she finds the Lion. Each one had unique attributes that, as a collective, helped her on her journey forward to finding the wizard, to defeating the witch, to having the backup and support that she needed as she moved along. She was not afraid to take on folks. Every relationship that we will engage relationships on our journeys. Every relationship may not be long term. You may not be celebrating 50 years with folks. Some of these are more finite, but they are important because they get you from point A to point B, which is helping you move along to the final point where you want to be. Personally, my favorite was the Scarecrow, but we won't even go into that. Okay. And she recognized there would be obstacles. For Dorothy, there were many. She got hungry. She tried to eat an apple. There were these non-generous trees that not only didn't want to share, but threw apples at her when she tried to get a snack. You had the drug pushing witch who wanted something from her, who tried to get her hooked on poppies, which for those of us who are unaware, that's opium. A phony wizard who didn't want to help for fear that it would expose his inadequacy